you everyone for coming today. I feel like I'm transported back to 1978 at Steve and Caroline's wedding. I went from a hill country wedding of my own 2 weeks prior in the middle of California to arriving in Pittsburgh, probably a few more hundred people than this. So I thank you for coming and celebrating Steve's life. Sam mentioned a number of things. Steve and I, you could say, were yin and yang. He was the slide rule guy. He was the guy, I wouldn't have used the word statistical, but I too had a plane ride. Mine was courtesy of the US Army in Germany by a Vietnam pilot in a helicopter. And when he turned that on the side, I had no idea what kept me in the helicopter until this moment when Sam explained that. And that would be so like Steve. I also, Sam, your story about wrestling with the three brothers. Steve was kicked in the head during a wrestling practice, I believe it was, in 8th or 9th grade. And he literally became the man with the biggest noggin. It was, he was also our patriarch. And we, among my brother Brian, who was not able to be here today, and myself and Stephen, he was a patriarch. And so I accept that torch. And this is from my brother Brian. You mentioned the Red Baron. Our home was filled with music, and oftentimes because of Steve. The Red Baron, Snoopy and the Red Baron, the Christmas album. I know a few of you remember that one. That played infinitum, and so that was awesome, Sam. I want to just read a few things. Steve and I've known Steve longer than anyone. And we began our adventures in Lancaster, in a rented farmhouse. And Steve being the older one, I looked at him as the leader, you know, kind of informal leader. But we went out in the fields and we picked wild berries. He was the one that would end up at the house with the berries. I, for some reason, couldn't understand why the berries I put in my pocket weren't edible by the time I got back to the house. We went to the New York State World's Fair, early 60s, courtesy of a favorite aunt of ours. Steve and I, I'm sure he led the charge, were fishing coins out of the big pool where the planet rested in that. Again, these are all Google events, so if you need verification, you can find it. He was my scout lead from our earliest adventures. And that also became literal during one summer extended stay at the Boy Scout camp up in Dillsburg, Camp Tuckahoe. And Steve was a great swimmer because all of us had swimming lessons, but Steve was extraordinary when it came to swimming. Well, I knew that, and so one day I decided I wanted to go out in a canoe in the middle of this big lake, and I didn't have a proper tag that they put up on the board. So I took Steve's tag, and whoever was with me took somebody else's tag, and we ended up in the middle of the lake. Naturally, the universe being what it is, Steve and his buddy showed up shortly thereafter, and our adventure got cut short. Hearing the stories about Steve and the Fixer, I'm acutely aware that, having grown up in a house, a Victorian home, that was built in the 1880s. Steve didn't do much fixing around the house, nor did any of us, but he did his other share of creativity. And just a side note, it's wonderful to a cousin, they will talk about the Man's family home and how they would either start at our house and then go to another relative's house for kind of a breather, or they would end up at our house, and you know, those stories continue to this day. It was a house of memories. During the early years of our lives, we had libraries, actual books. Books weren't banned, so you could find out how to make smoke bombs. We had telephone books. We had no internet. Steve, when he was, again, this 13, 14-year period of age, he located a World War II German Zundap motorcycle. It arrived at the house in boxes with a piston. And again, this is Googleable, so those of you that don't know what a motorcycle piston is, feel free to look it up. Steve figured out that if he put the cylinder of the motorcycle engine in the oven and then quickly transferred it to the freezer, and if he continued to do that numerous times, he could get the piston out. Lo and behold, he got the piston out. He was quite proud of that. It wasn't long before that motorcycle was running. Well, that 1880s house had a huge basement, and it had one of these outdoor accessible staircases, rather steep. You've seen it in Wizard of Oz, where the two doors clamp down over the stairs. Well, that was kind of like our launch pad. So Steve got that motorcycle running to the point where he was able to ride it out of the basement. We were somewhat infamous in our neighborhood. This was Steve's beginning of a long love affair with anything that has a motor. He had rebuilt a Norton motorcycle until a good friend's younger brother wrecked it against the York City parking garage wall. And I don't think it ever saw the light of day after that. He had, we all know what these little Italian scooters are nowadays. Steve somehow, at this ripe age of 13 to 15, found a Vespa. And because we grew up in a rather working class neighborhood, we had machine shops around us. We also had railroad tracks. He found a frame, it looked like a modified bike frame. Took it to a machine shop. He had them cut the front forks off the Vespa. He dropped the 175cc engine into that bike frame, welded the wheels onto it, and we had the most incredible illegal motorcycle. Keep in mind, the Easy Rider had come out, I believe it was 68, 69. This was a version of it. Steve, once he hit high school, ended up with a bread truck. It was a full-fledged hippie mobile. The steering, again, for those of you that are too young, a lot of these steering wheels in these trucks had a lot of play, like about half a foot. So it was a real joy to drive that thing. I got to drive it. And I tapped somebody's rear bumper. Made a little noise. His last project, while I was still home, he bought a Jaguar. Not the drivable kind. You know, rebuild your own kit Jaguar. I believe it was the front grille that was coming in at well over $200 that he decided this project's dead. He was a modern man, boy, shaped by the writers of the day. Hefner, Merriam-Webster, Britannica Encyclopedia, as I mentioned, our city library. in every sort of magazine available at the time. And his Bible perhaps was Zen and the Motorcycle. He smoked his meerschaum pipe in his best imitation of pop culture stars. I'll leave that to your imagination. All the while listening to Jesus Christ Superstar blaring from the downstairs. He lived on the side porch during the summertime in York, and that was just like, it could have been a penthouse. Just Steve came into his own then. He had this sense of knowing what he wanted, and he had a way of delivering what he wanted. And those projections were normally aimed at the old man. And I was smart enough to know that we're going to have some fireworks. Whether it was long hair, inappropriate clothes, some other things, it led to fireworks. But Steve knew what he wanted, and Steve went out and got it. He went to George Washington University, and then ended up graduating from Penn State Engineering School. And that is where I believe the rough edges, the whole package of Steve, and every event leading up to that moment. Caroline took the reins, and new adventures began. I want to mention I used to go down to West Virginia, see him quite frequently, and one wonderful evening, they had a dock on the Ohio River, and their home was right there. And some friends of theirs came down. Later I found out the boat was what they call Lake Erie boat. Basically, it was big, the engines were big, and they could pull more than one, what do you call them? Water steers. Thank you, water steers. Steve was like, Mike, you can do this. You need to do it. Caroline was up in the kitchen cooking dinner. And of course, me being me, who am I to not follow my brother's orders? They're like, we'll pull you off the dock. Didn't have a cell phone then, but sure had a wallet, man, long pants, everything else. I made it up, and lasted about 10 feet before the rooster tail started drowning me, which is the boat motor to throw in the water. And of course, everybody had a good laugh. I might suggest other than Caroline, but that was Steve and I at our finest. Our incredible aunt, Anne, recently remarked that Steve was our bon, I can't say it.
Vivant. Vivant.
Thank you. To me, he was my magician who gave my dream wheels, and he continues to ride, hair blowing in the wind. Thank you all for coming today.